Section 2.2, we're going to be focused on the slope of a line. Now, slope by itself has a few different definitions. One of the definitions for slope that you might have heard of is rise over run. When we say rise, that means going up and down. Run means we go left and right. The formula for slope is y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. Another way to think about that is just the change in the y over the change in the x. A triangle stands for delta. Delta in math just means change. So if you subtract the x's, you subtract the y's, that's what that means. My favorite way to think about slope is the top number tells you whether you're going up or down. The bottom number tells you whether you're going right or left. If the top number is positive, you go up. Negative, you go down. If the bottom number is positive, you go right. Negative, you go left. So just so you know, different slopes that we could have on a graph. You can have a graph go up from left to right. This would have a positive slope. Use M for slope. You could also have a slope that goes down from left to right. That would be a negative slope. You can have a slope that's horizontal from left to right. This would be like if you had y is equal to a number. This has a slope that's equal to 0. And then we could also have a line that doesn't really go left or right, it just goes up and down. This would be a line where x is equal to a number. And the slope, we would just say is undefined. The difference between undefined and 0 is just where 0 is in the formula. So a slope of 0 would be like if you had 0 on top. That would give you a slope of 0. Undefined would be if you had 0 in the denominator. So, a couple questions to find the slope. If I ask you to find the slope between -6, 9 and 3, -5. Just by using our slope formula. Slope formula says we subtract the y values over we subtract the x values. Generally, what I do is I draw arrows to make sure I'm being consistent. So I'm going to do this y value minus this y value. -5 minus 9 over 3 minus -6. -5 minus 9 is -14. 3 minus -6 is just 9. That would be how we find slope between 2 points. And sometimes what we're going to do, and we'll learn more about this in the next lesson, but if I asked you to find slope of 3x minus 4y is equal to 12. There's a couple different ways to do it. I'll show you another way in the next section. But for this section, I want us to find the X-intercept by making y 0. I want us to find the Y-intercept by making x 0. We put 0 in for y, we get 3x minus 4 times 0 is equal to 12. 3x would be 12. Let's get x is 4. What that means is when we go to graph it, the x-intercept is 4, which is right here. To get the y-intercept, we put 0 in for x. Negative 4y equals 12. We divide by negative 4. Y is equal to negative 3. We get a line that looks like this. I didn't ask you to graph it, I asked you to find the slope. So what you do is you start at one point, it doesn't matter where it is. Start at this point, and we want to go to the other one. So it looks like to go to the other one, I have to go down 1, 2, 3. And to the left, 4. So if you look at what we said before, the slope, top tells you whether to go up or down. The bottom number tells you whether to go right or left. According to that direction that we just went in, the slope would be down 3, left 4. Slope would be 3/4. You can get it just by looking at the graph. Another way to get that slope is to start at this point and go up 3 to the right 4. You wind up getting the same exact slope. And we can get slope just by counting. What if I asked you to slope of each line? And I gave you 2 examples. Say y plus 3 equals 0. And let's say x equals negative 6. You get y by itself and just subtract 3 on both sides. You guys show me with your arms, what does y equals negative 3 look like? Is that like this, or is that like this? Y equals anything. What does y equals anything look like? It's a horizontal line, right? So y equals negative 3 looks like this. When you have a horizontal line, the slope is 0. Because there's no top change. It doesn't go up or down. If you have x equals negative 6, that would look like this. The slope here is undefined. Because if we were going to make a fraction, it doesn't go right or left, so you would have 0 in the denominator. depending on where 0 is, that gives you either a slope of 0 if it's horizontal or an undefined slope if it's vertical. Something called slope-intercept form. Slope-intercept form looks like this. Y is equal to mx plus b. We're going to learn more about this in the next section. But m is the slope and b is the y-intercept. So if you get something in this form, you could just look at it and say that's the slope right there, whatever m is. So if you had a problem like this, find the slope. 3x plus 4y equals 9. Using the slope-intercept form, we just want to get y by itself. So what that means is if we subtract the 3x on the other side, we did this kind of thing in the first day together when we were solving formulas. Yeah, 4y is equal to negative 3x plus 9. We still want to get y by itself. So if you divide everything by 4, now that y is completely by itself, this is your slope. Slope is negative 3/4. We could have graphed it by getting the intercepts, and then we could have counted. This is just another way to do it. I could ask you to graph the line through negative 3, negative 2, with a slope of 1/2. If I just ask you to graph a line that goes through negative 3, negative 2, remember this is the x value, this is the y. So negative 3, negative 2 is right here. If the slope is 1/2, we could think about this a couple different ways. One way is that from that point, we go up 1 and to the right 2. We go up 1 and to the right 2. It gives us a point right here. Another way to think about 1/2 would be negative 1 over negative 2. We know that when we have a negative on top and bottom of a fraction, that simplifies. This would be if you go to down 1 and then to the left 2. Look what happens. You go left 1 and then down 2. Left 1 and down 2. You wind up getting exactly the same line. One other thing to talk about with slope, and that's parallel and perpendicular lines. Parallel lines have the same slope, and they also never touch. Talk about parallel lines. Sometimes we draw lines like that look like if they keep going forever, they'll never touch. We also are going to talk about what's called perpendicular lines. Perpendicular lines cross at a 90-degree angle. And they have opposite and reciprocal slopes. Opposite reciprocal would be like if you had 2/3. The opposite would be a negative, and reciprocal would be 3/2. 2/3, -3/2. You took the opposite sign, and you also took the reciprocal, which just means you flip the top and bottom. I wanted to finish this section by giving you a few examples where I ask you, are the lines parallel, perpendicular, or neither? I wanted to give you 3 examples so you could see the difference between parallel, perpendicular, and neither. Parallel means that they have the same slope. Perpendicular means they have the opposite and reciprocal. And neither just means none of those 2 cases happen. So let me give you 3 examples, and we'll move on to the final section. What about if we had point -2,5, -4,8, and then we also had 2, 0, and -1, -2. We have 2 lines. Figure out their slope and then compare them. The slope of the first line would be 8 minus 5 over -4 minus -2, which is 3 over -2. If the second line is parallel, it's going to be the same thing. If it's perpendicular, it would be positive 2 over 3. Now just keep in mind, 3 over -2 is the same thing as -3 over 2, which is the same thing as -3 over 2. Sometimes people don't realize that when you have a negative fraction, it doesn't matter where you put the negative. In the second line, the slope would be -2 minus 0 over -1 minus 2. Which would be -2 over -3, or positive 2/3. What are these 2 lines? Perpendicular, because not only are they switched, but they're also the opposite signs. What about if we had a problem like this, where I gave you an equation, 4x minus y is equal to 2, and x minus 4y is equal to negative 8. Talk about finding the slope if it's in slope-intercept form. What I'm going to try to do is try to get the y by itself. I could just look at the slope, which is the number in front of x. The first thing I'll do is subtract the 4x on both sides. And I'll get negative y is equal to negative 4x plus 2. And then divide by negative 1. Get y is equal to 4x minus 2. The slope would just be 4 over 1. Whenever you have a slope, you could think about it as just 4. If you want to make it a fraction, you could always write it over 1 also. And then the second equation, let's bring the x on the other side. So negative 4y is equal to negative x minus 8 divided by negative 4 gives us y is equal to positive 1/4 x plus 2, where the slope is 1/4. Are these parallel, perpendicular, or neither? Neither, right? Obviously, they're not the same. Why wouldn't they be perpendicular? Well, reciprocal just means that they switched, right? Yeah, one's positive, the other's positive. If they're perpendicular, one would be positive, one would be negative. All right, reciprocal just means that you put the top of positive. We just didn't do the other thing. Instead of giving you an example where the slopes are the same, I'm sure you guys could figure that out, right? You see two same slopes, that means that they're parallel. I do want to make sure we have time for this last section. So the last section here is 2-3.